Small businesses are the heart of the American economy. They're responsible for half of all private sector jobs.
If you want your economy to grow, if you want the country to be hopeful, it seems like you ought to be celebrating the talent and energy of our small business owners.
According to the latest data from the U.S. Census Bureau, small businesses are actually responsible for more than 90% of new jobs in this country.
And that's small business. It's an engine. It's the most fundamental difference we have in terms of the backbone and strength of our economy.
They are called the engine that drives the American economy. Small businesses provide jobs for more than half of the nation's workforce.
So small businesses are not only job generators, they're also at the heart of the American dream.
They create over 80% of the new jobs. Most Americans work for small businesses.
Small businesses are the backbone of the American economy.
Small businesses create most of the new jobs.
Small businesses.
Small businesses.
And all small businesses.
Small business.
And small businesses. Small businesses.
Small businesses.
Small business. Small business. Small business.
Small businesses.
Small businesses.
Alarming new evidence tonight of widespread fraud in a federal government program designed to give money to small businesses.
You see, reports and investigations have been surfacing in the last couple of years that have exposed the inside workings of a fraudulent system.
You might think that the name Small Business Administration would be a clear description of what that government agency does: support small businesses and make sure that they get a fair share of federal contracts. Well, not quite.
The Small Business Administration recently admitted that billions meant for small businesses have gone to much bigger companies. Names from a who's who of corporate America, like aerospace giant Raytheon and tech titans Hewlett-Packard and Oracle.
Do these look like small businesses to you? Or these? Well, they did to the government, which handed out fat contracts that were supposed by law to go to small businesses.
44 large firms were incorrectly listed as small.
The result is billions of dollars in losses for those small businesses, the biggest source of jobs in this country, by the way. And the reason? A classic Washington mix of lax oversight, bad policy, and poor management.
When they see the name Rolls-Royce or Microsoft, if that doesn't ring the bell, if that doesn't tell them that they are large corporations, come on.
SBA's validation controls failed, as 3 of our 4 bogus firms were certified.
Fraud, waste, and abuse.
It's not miscoding, it's intentional, and then in many cases, it's outright federal contracting fraud.
As the new head of the Small Business Administration was sworn in today, Democrats on Capitol Hill were suggesting a new name for his agency, maybe something like the Big Business Administration.
Every president in my lifetime has talked about the importance of small businesses, and a common phrase is they're the backbone of the nation's economy. But when you look at the facts, the legislation and policy come out of Washington, the federal government is aggressively anti-small business. I think that's probably hard for people to believe. I have sued the government for 25 years. I've won over 100 legal battles, 95% under the Freedom of Information Act, to expose thousands and thousands of pages of government reports that show that the government is cheating small businesses out of billions of dollars a year. There's one agency in our government to help small businesses, and that's the SBA. Well, the SBA was established by the Small Business Act, and the principal program that the SBA administers is the government contracting program. So today, based upon the original Small Business Act, a minimum of 23% of all government contracts should go to small businesses. The federal acquisition budget for 2015 was $1.2 trillion. 23% is $270 billion. Well, here's what I've found. Fortune 500 firms, particularly in the defense and aerospace industry, want every penny the government spends. So for 30 years, they've lobbied Congress and every president to dismantle the Small Business Act, close the SBA, because they want that money. The $270 billion that's supposed to go to small businesses, they want that. And that's where you see, going back to the Reagan administration, just an unrelenting barrage of policies and legislation and little tweaks in the law to dismantle the Small Business Act, because those big businesses want that money. And I think everyone knows that Fortune 500 firms have got an infinitely more clout in Washington than the middle class and small businesses. If you look at the U.S. Census Bureau data, our information put out by the Small Business Administration, small businesses create over 90% of the net new jobs in this country. There are about 29 million small businesses. 98% of all U.S. companies have less than 100 employees, 98%. 89% have less than 20 employees, and the average American business has 10 employees. They're responsible for over 50% of the private sector workforce, over 50% of the gross domestic product, and over 90% of all U.S. exporters are small businesses. Small businesses, are the backbone of our nation's economy. That's a fact. And the Small Business Act that mandates that 23% of all government contracts go to small businesses, I view that as the most efficient, effective economic stimulus program in history. What better way to invest our tax dollars than to ensure that 23% of that goes to the small business where most Americans work and all the jobs are created? But unfortunately, those programs have been almost completely repealed after 30 years of lobbying by big businesses. There's two ways that the SBA cheats small businesses today. Number one, they include billions in federal contracts to Fortune 500 firms and their subsidiaries, aimed with the dollars that they claim went to small businesses.
Awarded these companies and 62 more just like them contracts as small business.
We are talking about the Microsoft of the world and the Rolls-Royce and Lockheed Martin that has no business in getting contracting dollars that are supposed to go to small businesses.
It's a practice that cost small businesses an estimated $12 billion in 2005.
The second one is they use an acquisition budget that excludes, I would say, about 2/3 of the real acquisition budget. So that cheats small businesses out of over $150 billion a year. I think over the last decade, it's probably, I would say, at least $2 trillion. So think what the impact that has on the middle class economy when the agency that was established by the Small Business Act to specifically help small businesses has degenerated into falsifying and fabricating that data to try to make whoever's president look like he's pro small business and try to make it look like the agency's hitting those goals. It's very sad.
The government awarded small business contracts to some real heavyweights. Microsoft got $475,000. General Electric got $1.9 million. Home Depot got $2.3 million. AT&T got $5 million. Northrop Grumman got $90 million. Susan Hughes runs a small business out of her Virginia home. She lost out on a government contract that went to a large company.
I am here today because I want to prevent, if possible, any other small businesses from being victimized by this fraud as my company continues to be.
Today's report says small firms lost $12 billion to the big boys. $12 billion of your money. John Cochran, ABC News, Washington.
One night in 2002, I was leaving the office and I saw a computer left on down the hallway. And I went down to turn it off. I thought, I'm going to sit down and look at the SBA's database of small businesses called ProNet. It was a relational database. You could search by city, by the type of business, whatever. And I just started sort of flipping through it. And I'm seeing Home Depot, IBM, Hewlett-Packard, ExxonMobil. That night, in about an hour, I found 600 of the biggest companies in the world on there. And I contacted everybody in Washington, my congressperson, which was Barbara Boxer at the time, the FBI. I contacted the Government Accountability Office, and they called me back. I remember I was picking up my luggage at the LA airport, and the guy from the GO called me up and he said, "Kid, you hit a home run for doing the investigation." And I'd sent them all the information I'd had. And they did a 6-month investigation with 6 investigators. And they found over 5,300 large businesses receiving federal small business contracts that year. The Associated Press wrote a story about that and ran in newspapers all across the country. And I thought, okay, problem solved, it's going to be over. I was asked to testify before Congress, so I put together a 4-inch thick binder of all the evidence I'd found all the big businesses and international conglomerates that were getting federal small business contracts that I'd taken off the SBA's database of small businesses. The day before the hearing, I was invited to go meet with Congressman Donald Manzullo, chair of the House Small Business Committee, and discuss this hearing. And I'd seen him on television on, I guess it was C-SPAN, doing these congressional hearings, and he was really aggressive, and I thought, boy, this guy's gonna be my hero, and this is gonna be great. And so I showed up, and there was a round table, and he was there, and there were two gentlemen there that were with him. One had been a former Pentagon executive that was on his staff, and one was a gentleman who worked for the General Services Administration. So we're sitting there, and I gave Chairman Manzullo this big binder of all the information. And so I started talking to him. And when I asked him questions, he didn't say anything. I think I asked him maybe 6 questions. And it was funny, I would look at him, he's right across the table from me, and I would ask him a question, and one of these guys would answer for him. I thought that was very strange. I don't think he answered any of my questions. So I think the meeting lasted, 15, 20 minutes, and I left. I went back the following morning, and as I walked, I don't know, maybe it was 100 yards to the room where the hearing was going to be held, this gentleman who'd been on staff with the GSA walked right next to me. And the whole time, he whispered in my right ear. He said, "Don't mention fraud. The chairman doesn't want to hear fraud. Don't mention fraud." He said that 50 times. Don't say fraud. So I get to the room, and I sit down, and about 2 or 3 minutes go by, and a guy comes in that I didn't recognize, and he had the binder I'd given Manzullo, and he drops it on the table next to me. Boom! This thing weighed about 10 pounds. So here's the guy, Fred Armendariz, who's going to be responding for the SBA, not the SBA administrator, but some lower-level guy. Major congressional hearing. My impression was it was going to be like a court case, and this guy was, on trial, and Manzullo was going to grill this guy with the information that I'd given him, and he gave it to that guy. That's when I knew this isn't going to go like I thought it was going to go, right? And that was a 5.5-hour hearing. Dave Cooper from the GAO that did the investigation talked for 7 minutes. Some other small business guy talked for 7 minutes. I'm there because the investigation that they're there to talk about was based on my information. I got to talk for 7 minutes. The rest of the time was what I would call a dog and pony show or a pep rally for the Bush administration, talking about what a great job they were doing with small businesses. And at some point in time, I got so frustrated. I had all these documents in front of me, and I grabbed the listing of a major Fortune 500 firm that I won't mention, and I held up above my head and said, "Chairman Manzullo, when they're talking about small business, that includes, this company." And Manzullo asked Fred Armendariz, "How would you respond to that?" He said, "Oh, we've combined some databases. There's just some computer glitches." And the guy goes, "Okay." And they went on like that. I couldn't believe it. I thought there was going to be a congressional hearing that really grilled these guys, and it was just the opposite. So after the GAO investigation came out, that exposed the fact that they were illegally diverting billions of dollars a year in federal small business contracts to some of the biggest companies in the world, the first thing they did was to eliminate the government's database of small businesses. It was called ProNet. So in 2016, you cannot do what I did and the GAO did in 2002 and 2003 and go through and see large businesses misrepresent themselves as small businesses.
Sandra Stolt considers her company a lean, mean fighting machine.
This is definitely a winner. It's going to work.
Which explains the camouflage and battle scenes.
We come to work each day, and we like to say we come to war.
8 of them all together run a computer business called Federal Edge. It was a top candidate for a big Air Force contract last May, a contract earmarked for small business. But wait till you hear who they lost out to. A billion-dollar corporation with 700 employees called GTSI. How does an operation like that win a small business contract? That's under investigation, but critics blame the Small Business Administration, the very agency that's supposed to watch out for companies like Federal Edge. SBA rules let companies self-declare whether they're big or small with no real checks. And companies stay classified as small for years.
A company that was awarded a contract as a small business would continue to be reflected as a small business for the life of the contract.
Which could be 20 years.
It could go up to 20 years, yes.
even if the small firm grew large or got gobbled up by a corporate giant. The Small Business Administration recently admitted that billions meant for small businesses have gone to much bigger companies, names from a who's who of corporate America, like aerospace giant Raytheon and tech titans Hewlett-Packard and Oracle. 44 large firms were incorrectly listed as small.
I decided I'm not going to stand for it anymore.
She filed a challenge and won back that big Air Force contract. Going to war against the big boys in business isn't easy.
That's a done deal.
But sometimes the fight pays off.
The next major event that happened in this government scandal of cheating the middle class came in 2005 when the SBA Inspector General released 3 reports, 514, 515, and 516. In Report 514, the SBA Inspector General uncovered that the Small Business Administration itself was reporting awards to large corporations as small business awards. They took a sampling of some of the largest contracts the SBA had reported as going to small businesses, and it found that I think 66% of the contracts the SBA had said had gone to small businesses had actually gone to large businesses. The next report was 515, and I've got that one memorized. I've recited it so many times to so many reporters. One of the biggest challenges facing the Small Business Administration and the entire federal government today is that large businesses are receiving federal small business procurement awards, and agencies are receiving credit for these awards. 515. The SBA Inspector General described the diversion of federal small business contracts to large businesses as one of the largest challenges facing the SBA and the entire federal government today. That was a significant statement coming from an Inspector General. And then in Report 516, that report found that large businesses were committing felony contracting fraud. Under federal law, to misrepresent yourself as a small business is a felony with up to 10 years in prison under Section 16D of the Small Business Act. And the Inspector General found large corporations were making what they called false certifications and improper certifications to illegally receive federal small business contracts. The next interesting thing that happened involving the Small Business Administration and the diversion of federal small business contracts to Fortune 500 firms was a press release they put out May 11, 2007 titled Myth versus Fact. SBA and Government Contracting says myth. Large companies, including large multinational corporations, are taking away federal contracts specifically intended for small businesses. They say that's a myth, like unicorns and dragons. The SBA was so desperate to try to cover this up after the GAO investigation, the Associated Press story, reports 514, 515, 516. In October 2009, the Government Accountability Office released Report 10108, and they investigated the Service-Disabled Veteran-Owned Small Business Program. And it says here on the cover, case study shows fraud and abuse allowed ineligible firms to obtain millions of dollars in contracts. And this is one of my favorite statements from the multitude of federal investigations that found fraud at the SBA. By failing to hold firms accountable, SBA and contracting agencies have sent a message to the contracting community that there is no punishment or consequences for committing fraud or abusing the intent of the Service-Disabled Veteran-Owned Small Business Program. The way I interpret this is the GAO says the SBA and agencies are encouraging fraud. And when you look at the whole report, it's obvious that's what they're doing. Reports like this have come out really for years in all the different programs. This was a very significant report that came out in 2009, essentially accusing the SBA of allowing fraud, I'll say at a minimum, but in my way of thinking, encouraging fraud.
Alarming new evidence tonight of widespread fraud in a federal government program designed to give money to small businesses. Now, federal investigators say the Small Business Administration awarded contracts to businesses falsely claiming to be located in economically distressed areas. The agency even gave small business contracts to some of the country's biggest companies. Carrie Lee has our report.
Two government reports this month find the Small Business Administration awarded hundreds of millions of dollars to undeserving companies over the last 2 years. The SBA agrees with the findings.
We don't dispute their numbers at all. We've taken a number of steps and a number of issues to address the challenges facing many of our programs.
The Government Accountability Office concludes the SBA's Hub Zone program for businesses in economically distressed areas is, quote, vulnerable to fraud and abuse because information is rarely verified. The Inspector General for the Department of the Interior reports corporate giants like Home Depot and John Deere were counted as small businesses because of, quote, data entry mistakes, reliance on incorrect data, and a failure on the part of contracting officials to verify business size. Those mistakes also helped the SBA towards its goals.
It's not miscoding, it's intentional, and then in many cases it's outright federal contracting fraud. So I think the Bush administration has completely fabricated and falsified the government's compliance with the congressionally mandated 23% small business contracting goal.
The SBA admits it fell short of that 23% goal last year. Investigations on these big businesses getting SBA contracts began in 2002.
Now, any large firm that misrepresents itself as a small business to win a contract is guilty of felony. The Department of the Interior refers any suspicious activity to the Inspector General, but DOI and SBA sources, Kitty, tell us that there haven't been any prosecutions for misrepresentation. So meanwhile, all of this money is being awarded to companies that don't deserve it, and sometimes those companies misrepresenting themselves but not getting in trouble for it at all.
It's hard to see how some of these companies can represent themselves as a small business. They're household names.
Right. And, you know, in the GAO report, the GAO made up 4 fake companies blatantly not following the rules, and they still were awarded the certificate that they needed.
Destroys your faith. It really does destroy your faith in the effectiveness of this government. Thank you very much. Carrie Lee.
Sure. When President Obama ran for president his first term, I was a big supporter of his. I started working on his campaign and working with the campaign, and I did radio shows. I did as many as, I think, 6 in a day, all across the country, talking about what a great president he was going to be. I remember getting up as early as 4:30 in the morning to do these drive time radio shows on the East Coast. I endorsed President Obama as president of the American Small Business League during the Democratic primaries. He put my endorsement on the front page of his website, his campaign website, which surprised me. And he released this statement. I'm proud to have the support of the American Small Business League and their grassroots efforts to help protect American small businesses. Helping American small businesses is part of our movement for change and an end to politics as usual. A few days after I endorsed President Obama during the Democratic primaries, he released a statement that we had worked with his campaign on that I was very happy about. And he said this: 98% of all American companies have fewer than 100 employees. Over half of all Americans work for small businesses. Small businesses are the backbone of our nation's economy, and we must protect this great resource. It is time to end the diversion of federal small business contracts to corporate giants. Well, I was thrilled. I had worked for years to try to stop the government from giving small business contracts to Fortune 500 firms, and now here was a president that agreed with me and actually released a statement, a campaign promise that he was going to stop that. So I was very happy. He asked me to join his Small Business Advisory Committee. There was about 15 people nationally. And we would have these weekly conference calls. And our job was to put together what President Obama's small business agenda would be once he became president. 2 things happened that were very disheartening. The first thing that happened was I saw that the campaign website removed the statement, and it's time to end the diversion of federal small business contracts to corporate giants, from the rest of that statement. And when I saw that, I thought, uh-oh, this isn't good. The next thing that happened was he abolished the Small Business Advisory Committee, and they rejected all the proposals that we had made. And I thought eliminating the federal policy and practice of giving small business contracts to Fortune 500 firms was a no-brainer. I mean, after all, what percentage of American people would agree with me we shouldn't be giving federal small business contracts to the biggest companies on earth? And they even rejected that one. And I began to realize that this was just going to be another administration that was going to cheat small businesses.
During the campaign, we heard President Obama, then Senator Obama, get a powerful endorsement from the American Small Business League. At the time, President Obama said small business is the backbone of the economy. that it's time to end the diversion of government contracts out of Washington to corporate giants and make sure that they go to small businesses across the country. 2 months ago, the Treasury Secretary, Tim Geithner, reiterated that position. My guest today says the president has not only not lived up to that promise, but Lloyd Chapman, the American Small Business League's president, says the president lied. Lloyd, good morning. Your words, and you're ticked off.
Good morning, Bill.
You gave money to the Obama campaign. At one time, your endorsement was put on his website. I mentioned you're ticked off. Explain yourself.
Well, you know, I have been fighting the government for 7 years to try to stop them from giving government small business contracts to Fortune 500 companies and even some of the biggest companies in Europe. And so when President Obama promised to help us with that issue, we endorsed him. I donated money to his campaign. I used to get up at 4:30 in the morning and do radio shows all across the country campaigning for him. I met him. I talked to him about this. I thought the problem was going to be over. And as soon as he got elected, he actually changed his website to make it look like he never made that statement. That
So you say he's not fulfilling his word in the campaign. He's not fulfilling the word that he announced sometime in the last 100 days. Where's the proof that corporate America is getting the stimulus money out of Washington and not small business?
I'm glad you asked that question, Bill. There's been 15 federal investigations that found that Fortune 500 corporations are in fact the recipients of most federal small business contracts. In fact, the SBA Inspector General's office released an investigation a few years ago that referred to it as one of the biggest challenges facing the Small Business Administration and the entire federal government today. So it's a big, big problem.
But if the White House were sitting here today, they'd say you're dead wrong. They'd say we're putting $730 million from stimulus dollars towards small business to lower lending. They'd say we're putting $15 billion from Treasury into loans to help small businesses like yourself. And you respond how?
Well, they're wrong. They're wrong. That money is really not going to small businesses. You can talk to any small business out there in America and ask them. But they're also allowing $400 million each and every day in federal contracts that by law should go to small businesses to go to some of the biggest companies in the world. Over the years, I've contacted most of the major watchdog organizations in Washington to try to get them interested in this issue. And one of the groups that I'd contacted in 2015 was Public Citizen. And I guess it was March of 2015 that Public Citizen contacted me, and they were doing an investigation of, corruption and problems at the Small Business Administration. And the first time I talked to the guy, he was really angry because he contacted the SBA and they refused to speak with him on the phone. And they would only answer email questions. And he was not happy. I talked to him for, I think, 3 hours the first time I talked to him. So in May of 2015, Public Citizen released their report, Slighted. Accounting tricks create false impression that small businesses are getting their share of federal procurement money and the political factors that might be at play. So basically, Public Citizen put out a very well-written investigative piece that exposed the same problems that I've been talking about for years and years and years. He quoted Maria Contreras-Sweet, who's the head of the SBA, and in a hearing, Contreras-Sweet was asked why companies like Northam and Raytheon and Chevron were given small business contracts. And she said, we have a rule in place that says that once you get in a contract with the government, that you're given 5 years. And so if a large company acquires a small business, then it is grandfathered in for a number of years, Contreras-Sweet said. There's nothing in federal law that would allow a company that's acquired by a Fortune 500 firm to continue to be considered a small business. There's no language in the Small Business Act that says grandfathering rule. The second paragraph says, but Contreras-Sweet appears to have been in error when she claimed that small businesses could retain their small business status after being acquired by a large business. An SBA rule that took effect in 2002 called for a small business that had ceased to be small due to acquisition to properly inform the SBA of this fact and for the agency not to count any future options or orders related to the contract towards its small business goals. When Contreras-Sweet said that to the House Small Business Committee, she either didn't know what she was talking about or she was lying. But again, there's absolutely no language in the Small Business Act that will allow that to happen. And the report went on with a number of very telling and incriminating statements how the SBA had cheated small businesses and fabricated the volume of federal contracts that went to legitimate small businesses. I think what's important to know is that the abuses that were uncovered by Public Citizen have gone on for 15 years. So the kind of abuse that they talk about has now gone on for 15 years. And I'm not sure how much longer it's going to go on before Congress finally does something to stop it. So for 15 years, it's come out in federal investigations and investigations in the mainstream media that there's rampant corruption and fraud in all federal programs to help small businesses. Why should most Americans care? The federal law that established that 23% of the total value of all government contracts should go to small businesses, and 5% should go to woman-owned small businesses, 5% to what the government calls small disadvantaged businesses and minority-owned businesses, and 3% to service-disabled, veteran-owned small businesses. That's the largest economic stimulus program for the middle class in history. I think most people are familiar with TARP, the Troubled Asset, recovery program, something like that. That was $441 billion, one-time shot. The Wall Street Journal said that of that $441 billion, only $2 billion went to middle class. That money all went to banks and big businesses. In 2015, the Congressional Budget Office said the discretionary spending budget was $1.2 trillion. A lot of legal experts agree that that's the correct number. I think that's the correct number. Well, 23% of $1.2 trillion is $271 billion. $271 billion compared to the $2 billion for TARP. All the corruption and fraud has knocked that down to maybe $30 billion. So the government is cheating the middle class out of well over $200 billion a year. So the last decade, they've cheated the middle class out of $2 trillion. The largest economic stimulus program for the middle class in history has been dismantled illegally. The middle class is being cheated out of $2 trillion last decade. Large corporations are shipping jobs overseas. I think everybody knows that. And that they've been paying a smaller percentage of the national income tax every year, I think since like 1965. So think of it this way. If the government quits cheating the middle class and actually gives them the 23% of all government contracts that they should get, the $271 billion, that means the 98% of all American companies get 23%, and the 2% get 77%. The 2% that the Kauffman Foundation say hasn't created one new job since 1980. The largest economic stimulus program for the middle class has been illegally and quietly dismantled. Most people never knew that it was what it was. That's cost people thousands of jobs. And if we can end the fraud and abuse in federal small business contracting programs, get that $271 billion in the middle class, it'll create millions of jobs and create a huge positive economic environment in America. Get mad, get angry, call your congressman, call your senator, call the local TV and radio station. They're violating the law and cheating you. We need to do something about it. 25 years I've been doing this. My first legal victory was in 1991, and I would have never dreamt that I have to be fighting this battle this long, and I would never dream after winning 30 lawsuits and uncovering the fraud and abuse, prompting dozens of federal investigations, that I would be sort of like, blacklisted from the media, and that no one could talk to me or write about me.